and I will be talking about what happens after high school for, I don't think so. Let's just check the sound again. Is the captioning working? Oh, it is? Okay, great. Okay, we'll try again. My name is Helen Rottier, and I'm going to be presenting on what happens after high school for students with disabilities. I'll be introducing a little bit about myself in just a moment, but I wanted to invite folks to, in the chat box, just put like 1 or 2 words about like what brought you here today. So if you're a parent or um, if you are a high school teacher or counselor or a college professor or advisor, and you feel comfortable sharing that information, just so that I know who's here. So today I'm going to give you a little introduction to myself and talk about some of the learning objectives for the session. I'll be talking about post-secondary education options because there are more than most people realize, and kind of providing a roadmap from high school to college. So talking about all of the different parts of that process and answering any questions that you might have. My name is Helen Rottier. I am a graduate student at the University of Illinois at Chicago, earning my PhD in disability studies, and my work is focused on supporting autistic students in higher education. I was diagnosed with autism at age 20 while I was an undergrad. Last spring, I graduated with my Bachelor's of Science in psychology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm a current grad student at UIC, and I'm the student coordinator for the Autism Spectrum People in Education peer mentoring organization, which is open to all college students in the Chicago area who identify on the autism spectrum. Some of the things I want you to be able to take away from this session are to identify various education and training opportunities for students after high school, to understand students' strengths and difficulties and address common challenges that are faced by disabled college students, and prepare students, families, and professionals to navigate the high school to college transition. Post-secondary education, we really usually think of like community college or university, but there are so many programs that I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of. And all of these programs are important and valid and lead into important and essential careers. There's no one-size-fits-all option for a student, and of course, some students won't go into any post-secondary education or training, and that's okay too. There are some really valuable and important jobs and careers that don't require any of this education after high school. So vocational school or trade school is specific to learn specific trades like an electrician or a plumber. There are also trade schools for other professions that you might not expect, like becoming an accountant or becoming a social media manager. There are community and junior colleges which provide associate degrees and can often transfer into four-year universities, institutes of technology, which provide associate's degrees and bachelor's degrees, mostly in science and technologies, a liberal arts college, or a university. Those are going to be your typical four-year programs where you finish with a bachelor's degree. There's also online college opportunities for students who maybe it doesn't make sense to go away for school, or students that want the flexibility to be able to take classes whenever they're available. So that works really well for students who are parenting or students who are working another job. And then finally, because I know some of you might be working with students with a wide range of disabilities and not just autistic students, I wanted to mention the transition and post-secondary programs for students with intellectual disability. There are 265 of these programs nationwide, and they are non-degree programs that equip students with independent living skills and job skills so that they can live in the community and be employed. And if you have any questions while I'm going through this, feel free to just pop them in the chat box. The transition from high school to college is kind of a daunting process, and a lot of people go through it, but sometimes it's hard to understand what all of the pieces are. So I wanted to kind of lay out some of the parts of this transition that disabled students might need specific support with, and that parents and educators can be aware of. And we'll be going through college planning, applications, the accommodations process at universities, what that actual physical transition looks like, and then campus life and some resources. A lot of times in the slides, I'm going to, and in my dialogue, I'm going to say you, and usually when I say you, I'm referring to the student. So for college planning, it's never too early to start talking about college, especially for disabled students who might not realize that college is an option for them. This can happen in small, age-appropriate ways. So for younger students asking, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what do you want to do when you grow up? And as students get older, asking, what do you think about college? What kind of things are you interested in studying? What type of program do you think is right for you? And really giving students the opportunity to explore that early on. And the next piece is identifying what is important to the student and family. So academic program is obviously a huge part of that conversation. If you want to be in like aerospace, you can't go to a school that doesn't have an aerospace program. But that's just one part of the picture. Another big piece is location, and this is especially important for disabled students who may be unable to leave or transition away from their current medical team or support team. When I started undergrad, I only applied to one school in my hometown because I was at a point where I couldn't leave my current medical team. Thinking about dorm life or other aspects of student life. So where does the student want to live? Where does it make sense for them to live? And to make lists of schools that students might want to visit and questions to ask during those visits. Visiting schools obviously requires some amount of money, but if it's a school nearby, you can probably take the trip. Some high schools offer school visits or can help provide funding for school visits as well. Standardized testing, so the ACT and SAT, are important for students interested in liberal arts colleges or universities and some online colleges as well. Both of these tests, the ACT and the SAT, provide accommodations to disabled students, but you need to start preparing early to get these tests with certain accommodations. And some sources recommend starting as early as fall of sophomore year for a student that will take these tests in spring of junior year. To gather all of that documentation, connect with school counselors, and make sure that you get all of that processed. Test scores are important in the application process, but they are just a number. We know these tests aren't designed for disabled students, and they're a small part of the application process. So it's important for students to be set up for success in these tests. Ultimately, it's only one piece of this bigger picture. And then applications. The application timeline is different for different students, depending on what kind of program they're applying to and whether they're applying early decision or early acceptance. So pay attention to any deadlines, requirements, and fees. Some of those requirements include a resume, a certain proof of community service hours, letters of recommendation from teachers, and you want to make sure that you're getting all of those things well in advance so that you don't run into a last minute crunch to get the applications in. And again, when I say you, I'm really talking about students. So parents and educators can support students on this and should be maybe gently reminding students to keep track of these things. But ultimately, if the student isn't able to do at least parts of these processes by themselves, you should be thinking about whether that's actually the right program for them to be applying to. A big question that comes up for disabled students is to disclose or not to disclose. And by that I mean in a college essay or application, whether you include that you are disabled or not. Some college essays ask questions about, resilience or courage or overcoming something. And so students like to share about their disability experience in those instances. But I want to make it clear that that's a really personal choice. And while it is an option, it's also not a requirement. So students can disclose their disability status or identity in their application. They're not required to. And if they do share that information, schools aren't allowed to use that solely to discriminate against them. So that's all important to remember. And then keep track of acceptances, additional deadlines like when to apply for housing, and any financial aid that students are eligible to receive from different schools. The number of schools that a student should apply to is really varies based on what kind of program they're going into and the individual student circumstances. So I applied to one school for undergrad, but some sources recommend 7 to 10 schools for students applying to a university or liberal arts college. It all really depends on what the student is interested in. As soon as you are committed to a certain school and you know this is where I'm going to be going, it's important to start the disability services process to get accommodations for classes. So in spring and summer before college, get all the necessary documentation for accommodations. If the student is moving to go to school, it's best to get this from their doctor or counselors at home who know them and who will easily be able to fill out all of that information. Usually schools provide a specific form or letter on their website that you can use to get that information. And start talking even before the application process about what kind of accommodations might be beneficial. You can get some of these ideas from a student's IEP or 504 plan. And you can also look at what universities that the student is interested in attending kind of offer on their website. So popular ones are testing accommodations, so either extended time on tests or taking tests in a separate room that will be hopefully less distracting. Note-taking accommodations, having someone else to take notes, and then technology access. Technology access is a huge debate in higher education right now, whether students should be allowed to take notes on laptops or tablets or not. And so some schools allow students with disabilities to have technology in classrooms where other students do not have that technology access. You can also get things like interpreters, captioning, and you can think about what isn't what might be helpful even if it doesn't seem necessary. So I'm a hearing person, but because of my auditory processing disorder, I have captioning as an accommodation, and I find that really helpful. I catch a lot more of what is being said in videos or audio that we are watching in class, and that has really helped me in the past year. Think about other options for accommodations. If you have an idea for an accommodation, it doesn't hurt to ask. So they can be kind of strange and unique to the student, but that's okay. Counseling, transitioning counseling and healthcare is a whole other webinar, I think. But I also wanted to share that it's important to be prepared for that, especially if a student is moving away, to plan on how they're going to establish care when they're on campus. Some common challenges that students experience. College is often a student's first time to live away from home. They have a lot more freedom and a lot less structure than they did in high school. And so all students experience challenges when they transition to college. And I wanted to focus on 3 areas that can be really challenging for specifically autistic students, but also for all disabled students. Those are social interactions, independent living, and then new people, places, and routines. The social challenges part is kind of the things that you don't get taught about college. So talking to professors and advisors is a huge part of the college experience. You need to be able to talk to professors and advisors about your classes and assignments and about networking and following opportunities that will help you after you graduate. And this is something that no one really tells you how to do. The first point I have is introduce yourself via email or in person before or immediately after the first class. And again, I want to emphasize that the you in this sentence is the student. There are very rare situations when a parent or another educator should be introducing themselves to a student's professor. But for a student to do this, it establishes a connection so that professor kind of has your name and face in mind, and that can be really helpful. If you're struggling in a class, get help early and often. It never hurts to go to an office hours with just a small question and say, I'm really struggling with this and I don't know what to do. Or to go to office hours and say, hey, I was really interested in this research that you mentioned in class, or this research that I know you're working on, and I'd love to learn more. And finally, this is an area where you can really follow a script. If you look online, there are lots of kind of templates for how to go to office hours and ask for help from a professor or a TA, how to email a professor or TA, and how to get different networking or opportunities or letters of recommendation from these faculty members. So it's okay to kind of look that up and have a formula in mind because these interactions are very formulaic. They really follow that script nicely. The second piece of social challenges is meeting new people and really meeting new peers and friends. But this is an opportunity where students can explore things that they're interested in. Campuses have so many clubs, organizations, and opportunities to try things that you're passionate about or to try new things. There are clubs for almost every topic you can think of, and if there isn't one, it's not too difficult for students to start a club or a student organization based on what they're interested in. And then I also want to emphasize here that if students are comfortable to look into groups with other autistic students or other disabled students, because that kind of community can be really great. It can be really relaxing and freeing and supportive during this time. And then finally, for students to just be themselves, and that's how they will really get to know people, is by being themselves, being on campus or in class and getting to know people that way. The last point I want to add to this is that if you're attending an online college, it might feel really hard to meet other people that are attending your online college, especially because you could be living halfway across the country or halfway across the world from some of your classmates. But I think still put in the effort to email or text or connect on social media with some of those classmates because they're going through some of the same experiences as you, and it's really nice to have that kind of support system. For independent living, I think it's best to begin building those skills really early. So when I was 5 or 6, my mom started coaching me to check into medical appointments by myself. She would say, go tell them that your name is Helen Rottier and you're here to see Dr. Jones. And so little things like that parents and educators can do to enforce independent living early is really important. Some strategies for students are to keep a calendar of assignments and tests, but also to keep track of chores, errands, and bills. I definitely do this. If you're a calendar person or a list person, it can be really helpful to say, okay, on the first weekend of every month, I'm going to do laundry. And on the second weekend of the month, I'm going to clean the bathroom. And on the third weekend of the month, I'm going to clean my kitchen. So kind of keeping track of things that way. Use life hacks. Students, especially college students, are pretty good at using life hacks. So, watch the YouTube video or the video that's how to make all of these great meals in your microwave, or how to organize your space. Sometimes that can be really useful. And do what is possible and sometimes what is easy. And by that I mean sometimes you should be eating vegetables and cooking your own food and cleaning and taking care of all of the things that need to happen. But sometimes, especially during those midterm or final exam crunch times, it's okay for students to survive off of ramen and Easy Mac for a few days, or to order takeout. Making sure that students don't feel so stressed, because disabled students are still students, and all students are going to have times when they're stressed about certain projects or tests, just to make sure that they're taking care of themselves whatever way is possible. And then new people, places, and routines. This is definitely the area of transition that I struggle with the most, both in my transition to undergrad and then my transition this past year to grad school. Visiting the campus or moving in early can make it more comfortable, and can also really help because then you can experience campus before there are a lot of students there. So if this is an option, it can be really helpful, even just to go to a dining hall or walk through a building where you might have classes and kind of see that space and be in that space before you're running to your first class. Following that point is to practice navigating to your classes and other important locations, again, before you actually need to be there. Being lost on a big campus is really frustrating and can be a little scary, but it's better to do that, on a day when you're not in a rush to get somewhere, when it's light out, when you can maybe have someone along with you to find all of these places, and you'll be ready on your first day of class. Be prepared for sensory difficulties and crowds. Depending on the size of your school, there might be really crowded places and spaces, and it's important to be prepared for that. Some ways that I prepare for those sensory difficulties especially is always bringing sunglasses with me, and wearing sunglasses indoors when needed. Some folks also have ear defenders or noise canceling headphones that they use in the same way. to have STEM objects or whatever it is that you need to keep yourself safe and comfortable. And finally, to take care of yourself. A lot of times students are doing really well academically and they seem to be thriving, but they're performing so well on the outside and not really taking care of themselves on the inside. And it's important that students are successful in all areas of their life, not just in their classes. Those are the big points or tips that I have, but I'm happy to answer any questions about transition, about my experiences as an autistic college student, or about the autistic student mentoring program that I run.
So I have a few questions here. Let me pull them up. The first question is, what can parents do to support a successful transition?
Yeah. I'm not sure if we have any parents joining us, but parents can be really helpful in um, uh, making sure that they're following the student's lead, preparing the student, and kind of supporting them and guiding them through this whole process and checking in. And one thing, in addition to like building those independent living skills, so like, yes, teach your child to make themselves dinner or do their laundry or clean the kitchen or like make them practice those skills at home, is to really emphasize as early on as they can that self-care piece, and self-care in a way that is sustainable, and is really focused on like long-term success and wellness, and not just I'm feeling stressed, so I'm going to buy myself something nice. That's good sometimes, but it's also important to have good care habits around feeding yourself, taking care of yourself, and doing things that make you feel like you.
Thank you for that response. Here's a second question. How can higher education become more accessible and welcoming to autistic students?
Yeah, my work is really focused on both supporting students and attacking these larger structures. So coming from um, above and looking at the areas of higher education that aren't accessible and making changes to those. Um, some specific things I think are important are that academia functions based on really inaccessible principles, especially for autistic students. Margaret Price has done a lot of great writing on that. Melanie Yergo has done some great writing on that. But to continue to carve out spaces and open these doors while also uh, imagining a different kind of possibility for disabled students.
The third question we have is, what advice would you give to students?
My advice for students is to um, build good habits as early as possible, get your accommodations as early as possible, uh, and to really kind of seek out those spaces that make you feel like yourself, that make you feel refreshed, and that are most comfortable, or where you really can kind of restore and renew your energy.
So I think that's it for questions. Um, Thank you so much, Helen. And then Helen also has these slides here for other
Yeah.
resources.
Yeah, so there are some really great resources that I wanted to share. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network has a guide called Navigating College that was written all by autistic self-advocates, which is fantastic, and it's available free online. The College Autism Network and Stairway to STEM are both websites and organizations that focus on this as well. Think College is run the transition and post-secondary education inclusion programs for students with intellectual disability, and Accessible College is a similar resource but for students with physical disabilities and health conditions. And I also wanted to share my information. You can contact me via email or on Twitter if you are interested in learning more about what I do or if you have any other questions.
Thank you, Helen, for that. Very informative presentation. All of you should be able to access copies of these presentations on the uh, accessibilityonline.org IDHT website. So you can refer to that if you have any more questions for Helen. And before we close, I just want to remind folks, if you are interested, we do have a webinar series. The next in the series is Thursday, May 30th from 1 to 2 o'clock p.m. Central Time. It's Let's Learn About ABLE Accounts by J.J. Hanley, Director of Illinois ABLE. And you can just refer to the website again, www.accessibilityonline. I'm sorry, www.accessibilityonline.org/IDHD. Thank you.